Yo, remember when this episode announcement actually lost Death Battle money on the Kickstarter? Not the impact they wanted, huh? Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and next time on Death Battle, we have an avatar named Aang versus a traveler named something. It's probably going to be Aether, but technically we don't know for sure. Now, I've said before that this was the matchup on the Kickstarter, or one of the matchups on the Kickstarter, that I was the least excited for compared to all of the others. However, with that said, I am still looking forward to this episode. It's still going to be an episode of Death Battle, and I'm excited to see how they put everything together. I think this has the potential to be the best Avatar: The Last Airbender episode that we have seen on this show, and while some people may disagree on this, I do think that analyzing Genshin Impact through this lens could also be pretty interesting. I do think that the timing of this episode, like when it's going to be released, is just a little ill-timed. Like, whether or not you think this is a big deal, I think it would have only benefited them to have waited for these characters' newest stuff to get officially released or fully released before they actually finished this episode. But regardless, I'm still excited, and I'm still hoping that it turns out the best that it can be regardless of the circumstances, so we're just gonna have to wait and see with all of that. So let's start with what Aang's got going for him, since we've seen him and other Avatar characters on the show before, and there's still a couple kinks to work out. Aang can expertly manipulate the four elements, obviously, those being fire, air, earth, and water, but there's some important details to note as well. He can manipulate all forms of water, like steam and ice, basically however he likes, and like Toph, he can use the seismic sense for extra detection of his surroundings. He may not be blind, but it still helps regarding making quicker reactions, especially against unseen threats. He can also generate fire from his own body and react to and redirect lightning, and he can increase his speed, maneuverability, and defense by using the air around him in various ways. Not to mention manipulating a person's life energy through energy bending, and while there are some bending techniques he didn't personally learn, like blood bending or metal bending, he would realistically gain the knowledge to do stuff like this after entering the Avatar state, which in general just gives him a ton of extra combat skill and experience. And this brings us to the question of Aang's maximum power, since there's definitely some debate over it. There are various avatars who have shown capable of performing city, or at least near city level feats of power and durability, which would certainly apply to Aang as well, but what about the Avatar state? Well, it's been used by others to achieve multi-gigaton level feats before, such as Roku triggering a volcanic eruption, and Kyoshi breaking what would become Kyoshi Island off of a continent, which Death Battle has even calculated before. Now, of course, there are always extra or higher calculations that could be thrown around for some of these feats, even as high as around country level for Kyoshi Island. But honestly, that's like the most realistic highball I could see Death Battle going with, even if that. Plus, the Avatar state is described as granting the power of all the previous avatars, and with Death Battle's own estimation of Aang being the 182nd, that lines up a lot better with being somewhere in the multi-gigaton or island level range. So that's what I'm overall expecting Death Battle to stick with, at least something like that for this upcoming episode, while being cautious knowing that they could go a little higher if they wanted to. Especially considering, spoilers for the leaked Avatar Aang movie, he apparently gets a new or stronger version of the Avatar state by the end. I haven't looked into this too deeply, I only know about this to get the best idea of this battle for this video. But now let's briefly go over what the Traveler can do, and like with Aang, not everything is going to be super clear, but we'll try our best anyway. The Traveler can control the same four basic elements as Aang and use them for various mobility and defensive options, along with lightning, life, and soon, presumably, ice manipulation, as well as extrasensory elemental awareness. And at least based on the cutscenes, we know that the Traveler can in fact switch between elements whenever they want, so any arguments that they'll be limited to fewer skills at any given time won't really be applicable here. They can create elemental reactions by combining them together, creating large area of effect attacks, weakening opponents' resistances, achieving damage multipliers, and more. They also have a decent amount of equipment, mostly consisting of various blades, and some of their elements can induce status effects, further leading to stacking damage. As far as speed goes, they should be at least lightning fast, potentially relativistic depending on how you buy certain energy attacks, whether or not they're light speed, including giant laser cannon fire that the Traveler themselves actually blocked, just for example. Figuring out the Traveler's power is annoying, because even though they've taken on some incredibly powerful foes, many of those instances happen within conditions that are unlike a death battle, like the Traveler getting help or the enemy not being at full power. But at the same time, we can't completely dismiss these events either, otherwise we're probably not getting the full picture. So trying to be realistic with this, single characters around the Traveler's level have various feats like slicing apart islands, flash freezing a tsunami, or creating storms that span across an entire country. The Traveler specifically also kept up with Dottore, who was gaining the quote, power of the three moons, but that fight didn't last very long, and if I recall correctly, he hadn't yet reached that complete level of power. Now, there are way more capabilities on and above these levels across Genshin Impact, but again, it's difficult to say what should be attributed to the Traveler or what would realistically be out of their reach. A lot of the higher scaling you could potentially use, like the Traveler helping to harm the implied to be world-devouring narwhal, would naturally be a lot more difficult to use to determine the exact levels that they would be at, you know? So I really feel like I just have to use my best judgment here. So based on the feats, and based on the previous chain scaling that Death Battle has employed for some characters, I personally think that country level is a safe estimate for the Traveler. I don't know if Death Battle is going to try to argue higher, but especially based on the Traveler's progress, I would be quite surprised if they tried to argue much lower than that. So as far as I can gather everything with this, Aang is at best physically even with the Traveler, only in the Avatar state mind you, but given equal leniency probably falls quite a bit shorter. Death Battle could choose to analyze things differently, that's always the hardest part to lock down when it comes to a prediction like this. However, there are some other comparisons that can be made that seem to be pretty clear-cut regardless of that. For instance, we know the Traveler is at very least 500 years old, which is older than Aang, but they've also been around long enough to witness the birth and death of stars, which, if taken literally, is way longer than even Aang's collective Avatar state experience of 10,000 years. And maybe even more obvious, the Traveler just has a few more tricks up their sleeve. Don't get me wrong, Aang has a lot of good abilities that could match up well with the Travelers or maybe even get one over them, and he's got some better control over his elements, probably. But not only does the Traveler have even more elements and can more effectively combine them, some of their specific attacks include inducing paralysis, minimally recovering their own HP, and just creating tons of explosions. Generally speaking, the elements found in Genshin Impact are a lot more destructive than Aang's bending. And this isn't even factoring in the Traveler's many stat or elemental boosting blades, partial elemental resistances, or their energy gun. Because sure, why not? Of course, there is the consideration of Aang's energy bending, although not only is using it potentially dangerous to his own spirit, we're also not super sure how well stuff like that works against non-benders. The main thing that Death Battle has said on this matter is that Korra could not use it to depower Storm because her abilities were genetic, not spiritual, which is correct. Compared to the Traveler though, on the one hand, no, the Traveler's powers do not come from some sort of genetic or biological trait akin to mutants or quirk users or whatnot. But they actually kind of have the opposite problem in that they aren't even really a part of the Traveler's life energy or personal spiritual energy or anything like that. Rather, they were bestowed upon them by the Archons and kind of just act as external magic spells that they can cast. So frankly, I'm a little skeptical of Aang being able to depower the Traveler. I mean, energy bending wasn't written with anything other than bending in mind, to be fair, and even if it could work, Aang would need to get in close and keep the Traveler in place for long enough, which would be a lot easier to do with definitively better stats. So right now, the biggest way I can see Aang winning this is if Death Battle attributes different levels of power to these characters, then I'm willing to bet that they will, as I mentioned before. And they could do that. Death Battle didn't email me their script or anything yet. I think you can definitely make the argument that Aang's abilities grant him a bit more more range, he could probably keep his distance for a while, but in nearly every other regard, Aang manages to barely keep up with leniency and with his strongest state, or he's just very clearly outclassed. From what I can tell, the Traveler just has more unpredictability and more experience for gaining the upper hand, as well as maybe being faster and, in my opinion, probably being stronger. Death Battle may interpret that the energy bending could work given the right opportunity, and like I said, Aang does have some very deadly bending techniques at his best, but I just don't see that overcoming everything else that's stacked against him more often than not. A character doesn't win just because there are ways they can win. I'll still be rooting for Aang all the way through, but I think Traveler's just got a bit more in their corner. But anyway guys, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this prediction video. If you did, be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this from me. I would ask that you try to keep this a generally nice place to be in the comments. We don't need the toxicity of Reddit coming over here, but of course, feel free to share if you're excited for this episode or not. And huge thanks to my channel members as always. Thank you for supporting the channel in the way that you do. It is amazing. But yeah, that's it for me. I will see all of you guys in the next video. Have a great day, and peace out.